Let us begin where you actually live. You set aside 10 minutes, perhaps 2, and with sincerity, you close the eyes and say, "Be still." And instantly the parade begins. Old conversations march past. A small regret taps your shoulder. Tomorrow's plan leans in with a clipboard, and, slyest of all, a spiritual voice whispers, "Look at you. You can't even be still." Now then, that is the moment I wish to meet you. Not at your ideal of stillness, but at the clamor that rose up as you tried to enter it. Do not run from it, and above all, do not make a theology out of that noise. You see, if we start by condemning ourselves for the very condition that is presenting itself for healing, we put a second padlock on the door we hoped to open. We must never use the words right and wrong about your meditation. Never, never, never. There can be no exception to this rule, because we are not dealing with morals. We are dealing with states and stages of consciousness. In other words, what appears as failure is often your present stage announcing itself honestly. This is where I am. That is not a defect. That is a disclosure. It is grace, because only what is brought to light can be lovingly met. I have no spiritual pride in saying this. I know where I am and where I am not yet. And I know that every genuine advance in this work has come the very hour I refused to pronounce judgment and chose instead to understand. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. If you treat stillness as an accomplishment, you strengthen the very self that cannot enter stillness. The personal will sits down to conquer silence, and the mind, being faithful to its nature, grows louder under pressure, like water that hammers harder at a dam the more you brace against it. Your best effort, if it is measuring itself, is the wrong approach for today. This does not say effort is wrong. It says that this stage calls for a different faculty altogether. What then? The promise of our time together is simple. We are not going to devise a stronger technique to muzzle the mind. We are going to discover a gentler pivot that renders the muzzle unnecessary. Be still does not mean blank your mind on command. Be still means lay down the self that would manage God and learn to receive. The missing link is not superior control. It is superior receptivity. And receptivity begins not with you speaking to God, but with you consenting that God may speak to you. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Not as a formula, not as a magic sentence, but as an inner attitude that disarms striving. You do not need to hold back the river. You need only turn the cup upright. If, in the very moment of noise, you refuse condemnation and quietly, humbly adopt the listening heart, you will have taken the first true step. The rest we will unfold, but for now rest in this. Your frustration is not failure, it is your readiness knocking. Open without judgment, and we will learn to listen. Now then, let us look more closely at this, because unless we see it as it is, we keep condemning ourselves or congratulating ourselves on the very basis that keeps us from the next step. We must never use the words right and wrong about your practice. There are states and stages of consciousness. Absolutely, there is no right and wrong in methods. There is only what fits your present stage, and what belonged to yesterday's stage and can be blessed and released without shame, without spiritual pride, without any sense of superiority for having outgrown it. You see, what helped you yesterday may not help you today. That is not a denunciation of yesterday. It is a recognition that life is unfoldment. Let us make a simple distinction. A state is a passing weather in consciousness. Anxiety, exhaustion, inspiration, a good day, a restless night. States change, and when they change, your capacity to notice them changes too. A stage, however, is a deeper readiness, a shift in identity from I, the manager of mind, to I, the witness, and finally toward I, the servant who listens. In one stage, you employ helps and props and formulas. In another, those very helps begin to feel like noise. That does not make them wrong. It says only that your center of gravity is moving. Now, when the mind grows noisy just as you sit down to be still, do not announce to yourself that you have gone backward or that you are unspiritual. Very often, it is precisely the opposite. The one who is thoroughly asleep does not know that he is dreaming. He is in the dream. The one who begins to awaken is the one who notices, ah, this is a dream. To become aware of thought is already progress. The noise you hear may be the first honest hearing you have permitted in years. Do not call that failure. Call it disclosure. Here is the common trap, and it is so human that you will smile as you recognize it. I must stop thinking. I must hold this mind still. I must win at silence. And instantly you have made stillness a contest, and you have placed the contestant, the achiever, the measurer, on the field. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. When you make stillness a contest, you are operating on the level of personal will, and personal will cannot produce spiritual communion. Never. 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 It can produce a mood, perhaps a lull, perhaps a numbness, but not contact. In other words, your best effort, if by best you mean the most determined, the most muscular, the most measuring, can be the wrong approach for today, because it strengthens the very self that cannot cross the threshold. Yesterday, counting the breath or repeating a phrase may have steadied you. Today, the same act may feed the doer and keep attention circling around, how am I doing? Bless yesterday. Thank it, and then let it go when it turns to noise. Do not adopt spiritual pride because you have outgrown a method. Do not adopt shame because you still need one. Simply be honest about the stage you are in. So hold this key thought close. If you treat stillness as an accomplishment, you energize the acquirer, and the acquirer cannot enter receptivity. We are not here to conquer the mind. We are here to outgrow the conqueror. As we see this, the strain begins to drain away, and we are readied for a different faculty altogether, the listening that does not strive. Now then, here is the great mistake. And I say it tenderly because nearly all of us have made it over and over and over again. We come to the silence to feel better, to fix the day, to reduce anxiety, to get an answer, to get a sense of peace before the meeting. And there is nothing wrong in the human sense with any of that. Those are natural desires in a certain state and stage of consciousness. But watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. When we take the inner life and turn it into a pharmacy, when we treat stillness as a pill that must produce a mood on demand, we are using a higher faculty for a lower end. And then we wonder why the river will not flow. In other words, the very motive that brought us to the chair keeps us confined to the chair. The moment you go within to get something, you have made the inner life a supermarket. You have kept the old bargaining consciousness, only now it wears a little spirituality and calls itself meditation. I will be silent so that you will give me peace. I will hold my breath so that you will give me guidance. No, never, never, never. Silence is not a currency with which to buy God. Silence is the atmosphere in which we consent to God's presence, and from that presence there flows what must flow, in its order and in its time. Ask yourself the hinge questions, and let them be honest correctives. What would you tell God that God does not already know? What is the use of trying to force God, or force your mind, into a mood? God is spirit, and God is law as well as love, and neither spirit nor law can be managed, coaxed, or informed. When we attempt to force the mind into placidity, we may attain a mental blankness, a lull, a humanly produced quiet, but we have not made contact. We have only rearranged the furniture of thought. The contact is another order. It is not the product of pressure. It is the fruit of yielding. You see, there is a lawful order to this. When the contact is made, harmony appears as effect, just as surely as light fills a room when the shade is raised. But if you start chasing the light, outlining how bright it must be and where it must fall, you keep your hand on the shade and then complain that it is dark. The peace, the guidance, the right activity, the supply, these come as added things when the kingdom is sought first. Not miracles to a divine sense, but the natural outpouring of a law already in operation. Only when you begin to outline the mood or the answer are you down on the human level, tugging at effects and missing cause. So the correction is simple, and it is the missing link we have been circling. The shift from petition and pressure to communion and receptivity. Stillness is not for producing a mood. It is for restoring contact, and the mood follows in its own time. The next time you sit and the hunger to get peace rises, recognize it as yesterday's habit appearing for release. Do not condemn it. Let it pass. Turn instead to the listening heart. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Not as a trick to win quiet, but as the honest posture of one who has laid down the bargain. You are not trying to stop thoughts now. You are consenting to hear. In a moment we will see how gratitude without an object opens that consent like a door. But for now, let the strain drain out of your purpose. Seek God, not quiet, and you will find that quiet begins of itself to seek you. Now then, let us come to the heart of this word, be still. Because if we miss its meaning, we keep straining after an effect and never touch the cause. We must never use the words right and wrong about how you have approached it. There are states and stages of consciousness, and in one stage you will hear, be still, and try to manufacture an empty mind, and in another you will hear it and quietly lay down the impulse to manage life through thought. In other words, be still does not command you to drive out every ripple of thinking. It invites you to cease being the driver. It is the surrender of the personal engineer who believes that salvation is an achievement of mental control. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. The more you attempt to conquer thought, the more you enthrone the conqueror, and the conqueror has no key to this kingdom. What then is the inner act? It is simpler than the mind supposes. It is a complete state of receptivity, wordless, not willful, open, not blank, alive, not numb. You are not trying to reach God. Where would you go if omnipresence is already present? You are consenting to be reached by that which is already here. The very pressure to get somewhere is the indication that you have momentarily forgotten where you live. Be still and know that I am God is not a command to produce a mental vacuum. It is a call to withdraw the personal hand from the levers and allow the fact of God to announce itself within. You see, there is a difference, vital and liberating, between omnipresence and availability. God is omnipresent in the hospital ward and in the boardroom and in the bustle of a noisy mind. Never doubt that. Never, never, never. But God is of no avail merely because of omnipresence. Availability is experienced through contact, and contact appears when receptivity dawns. Think of it like the air that fills this room. It is everywhere, yet it does not refresh you until you stop holding your breath. The holding is your will. The release is your receptivity.
Now, how do you know whether you are in the posture of receptivity or in the project of meditation?
Your own sense will tell you. If you feel tight, clenched, spiritually ambitious, measuring, timing, grading your quiet, you are doing meditation. You are trying to produce an absence. If you feel a softening, a yielding, an inward listening that asks for nothing and waits for no sign, you are being receptive. Stillness, then, is not an absence. Stillness is a listening. It is not a blank. It is an ear. It is not the muting of thought. It is the surrender of the thinker.
In practical terms, this means that when you close the eyes and the parade begins, you do not roll up your sleeves and wrestle. You simply lay down the wrestler. Turn from the thought to the attitude that welcomes presence. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Not to invoke a trick, but to confess a truth. I will not manage God. I will not outline peace. I will sit as availability to what already is. And as you rest there, without bargaining, without reaching, you will discover that the silence which matters is not a human hush, but a divine impartation. It may not come as words. It may come as a loosening in the chest, as a sense that the burden is no longer yours, as a quiet that is not made, but given. That is the stillness Scripture points to. That is the doorway through which omnipresence becomes a veil, law becomes guidance, and peace appears as the natural companion of a listening heart. Now then, here is the missing link, and if you will let it, it will save you years of wrestling. Turn the whole activity from, I must quiet my mind, to, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. In other words, exchange managing for availability. Not, I will make something happen, but I consent to what already is. The pivot is not another effort, it is a yielding. You are not pressing ear to heaven, you are letting the inward ear be uncovered. You see, the moment the will says, I will quiet, the doer is on the stage again, and the noise blossoms under the spotlight. But when the heart says softly, Speak, Lord, it steps out of the spotlight, and the stage begins to dim of itself. Now watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. Speak, Lord, is not a charm to be repeated until some bell rings. It is not begging, because begging presumes absence and attempts to bribe presence. It is not straining to hear a voice, because God is spirit, and spirit communicates as impartation. Peace felt, burden lifted, guidance dawning, often without syllables. It is the gentle surrender of the personal sense of control, the ceasing of the inward bargaining that says, if I do this, you must do that. Never, never, never. There can be no exception to the rule. The moment we try to purchase God with our silence, we have stepped out of communion and into commerce. What then is the practice, in the raw minute when thoughts parade? The micro move is simple. Do not fight, do not analyze, do not condemn. Let the thought be, and quietly turn, as one returns to the breath, but now with spiritual intent, back to listening, back to availability, back to speak, Lord. If the same worry taps you a dozen times, return a dozen times. Without irritation, without measurement. Each return is not a failure. Each return is a fresh consent. And do not look over your shoulder to see if quiet is following you. You are not hunting silence. You are attending presence. Why does this work? Because you withdraw attention from the mind's commentary and rest it in the deeper capacity to receive. You stop feeding thought with fear that it is dangerous, and you stop feeding silence with the ambition that it must arrive on cue. Attention is the lifeblood of whatever you honor. Honor commentary, and it multiplies. Honor receptivity, and impartation begins. God is law as well as love. When the listening heart is present, the law operates as guidance, peace, right activity. Not a miracle to divine sense, but a normal outflow once the obstruction of personal management is removed. Hold this tenderly, but absolutely. Never try to force stillness. Never, never, never. Let stillness be the natural byproduct of listening. If you will pivot from doing to hearing, again and again, kindly, without self-judgment, you will find that the quiet which matters is not something you manufacture, but something that meets you. And when it meets you, you will know. Not because a trumpet sounded, but because the weight slipped off. The next step appeared, and the heart ceased bargaining and began resting in what is. Now then, if you ask, what softens the will so that listening may dawn? I answer from long practice and from demonstration. Gratitude and love. Not sentimentality, not a sweet glaze poured over unrest, but that inner warmth which, the moment it appears, loosens the grip of fear and causes the mind to stop arguing its case. You see, fear always argues. Will always insists. But gratitude and love have no argument in them. They are recognition. They are agreement with reality as it is in God. And the soul opens under them the way a flower opens under the sun, without pushing, without schedule, without self-consciousness. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. When I say gratitude, I do not mean gratitude for something. The moment you attach an object, you are back in commerce. Thank you for this. Now please give me that. Never, never, never. That is the old marketplace mind in a new robe. I am speaking of gratitude for God, gratitude for presence itself, for perfection itself, for grace itself. Not because you have felt it today in a way that pleases you, but because it is truth, whether or not your senses are reporting it. In other words, you are not thanking for results. You are loving the reality that underlies all results. This dissolves striving because there is nothing left to get. There is only that to behold. Try this in the actual minute you sit down and the chatter begins. First, acknowledge omnipresence. Quietly, without drama. Father, thou art here. Here in this room. Here in this breath. Here in this very swirl of thought. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. Second, rest in gratitude. Not gratitude aimed at the chatter to make it go away, but gratitude that God is, that law and love are intact,
that grace is the substance and government of this moment. Let that gratitude be without an object, so the mind cannot bargain. Third, listen. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. And if thoughts rise, let them rise into gratitude rather than into panic. Let them be little boats floating on a sea that is already blessed, already filled with recognition. You will find that the center has moved. You are no longer guarding silence. You are resting in presence. Why does this work? Because gratitude and love lift you out of the acquisitive posture. They cleanse the motive. God is a law as well as love, and law responds to inner agreement with reality, not to pleading. When you stand in objectless gratitude, you are agreeing with omnipresence, and that agreement is receptivity. Contact follows that agreement as surely as light follows the lifting of a shade. Not a miracle to divine sense, simply law operating when obstruction is gone. Do not judge yourself if, at your present stage, you need to begin with this gratitude each time you sit. There are states and stages of consciousness. In one stage, you require this gentle warming of the heart before deeper silence becomes natural. In a later stage, the gratitude is so native that it precedes you into the chair. You discover you are already listening before you ask to listen. Neither is right or wrong. It is unfoldment. Honor where you are. If today's practice is acknowledge omnipresence, rest in gratitude, listen, and repeat as needed, then today you are faithfully on the way. Learn to love that truth. Be grateful without an object, and never again lift your mind to God with a single desire. Seek God and stillness, finding you yielded and warm, will enter of itself. Now then, let us speak frankly about methods, because if you do not see their place, you will either cling to them long after they have served you, or throw them away before they have steadied you. We must never use the words right and wrong about counting the breath, guided practices, mantras, or any other aid. There are states and stages of consciousness. In one stage, the fingers of the child hold tightly to the rail while learning to walk, and that is wisdom. In another stage, that same rail becomes a hindrance. You see, methods are rails. They are not the walk. They are not the life. They are mercies suited to a moment in your unfoldment. How do you know when a technique has done its part? The sign is simple and honest. It begins to feel mechanical. You notice a subtle tension, a sense that you must perform it right, or the day is lost. You become proud when you do it well, and discouraged when you fail to meet your own rule. You start keeping a private scoreboard. Good sit, bad sit. Many repetitions, few. Mind still, mind noisy. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. The very presence of the scoreboard is the evidence that the doer, the measurer, the acquirer has taken the throne again. And that is the one who cannot enter receptivity. Never. 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 In other words, the question is not, is this method right or wrong? The question is, what stage in me is using it? Is it opening receptivity, loosening the will, tenderizing the heart into objectless gratitude and listening? Or is it tightening control, turning prayer into a taskmaster, making me anxious to succeed at quiet? Be honest, and you will feel the answer without a committee meeting in the mind. If a practice now stirs tension, if it makes you self-conscious about progress, if it keeps you peeking to see whether silence is arriving on cue, then the practice has turned to noise for you. Bless it, thank it, and quietly set it down. Do not hear me saying, cast away all tools forever. No, I have no spiritual pride in this. I know where I am, and I know where I am not yet. And there have been seasons when a phrase steadied me, and seasons when that same phrase became a drumbeat in the head. Never be ashamed or afraid to acknowledge the stage you are in. Humility ends spiritual competition. It lifts the subtle burden of performing at prayer and returns you to truth. Prayer is not something you do well. Prayer is the life of God finding you receptive. So the gentle direction is this: simplify. Less doing, more listening. Fewer tools, more availability. If today a single inward acknowledgement, Father, thou art here, followed by wordless gratitude and the soft, speak, Lord, opens the door, let that be your whole practice. If, in a moment of weariness, a brief aid calms the surface so that listening may dawn, use it without pride and release it without guilt. Techniques are not wrong. They are temporary. As you mature, simplicity becomes the prayer. Listening becomes the method, and contact becomes the evidence. Seek God, not a flawless routine, and the routine will fall away of itself when presence has taken its rightful place. Now then, let us bring this right into the minute when the storm breaks loose inside you. The phone just rang, the deadline moved, an old fear found your address, and your mind is off to the races. You close the eyes to be still, and the orchestra doubles in volume. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. Do not tighten the reins. Do not announce a battle. The first step, simple, radical, saving, is stop the fight. The very instant you notice, I'm wrestling to make this mind be quiet, drop that project. Why? Because resistance is fuel. Tug on a dog's leash, and you create the very pull you hope to stop. The mind is faithful to its nature. Pressure makes it louder. So the first move is a non-move. Lay down the wrestler. Refuse the inner command to subdue thought. Never, never, never attempt to club the mind into silence. You only enthrone the club. Second, return to the pivot. Softly, inwardly. No strain, no schedule. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Let those words confess your stance. I am not outlining. I am not demanding. I am not purchasing peace with effort. I am available. In other words, you have changed centers. You are no longer the manager of mind. You are the listener of spirit. Do not sit waiting for syllables. God is spirit. Impartation is often wordless, felt as a lessening of weight, a loosening in the chest, a sense that the government of the moment has shifted from you to something faithful and present. If a worry taps your shoulder, don't argue. Return, quietly, again and again, to listening. Each return is not failure. It is fresh obedience to the pivot. Third, rest in gratitude, without an object. Not, thank you for fixing this, for that is commerce, but, Father, thou art here. Let gratitude be the atmosphere, not a tool. You are agreeing with omnipresence and law as the very substance of this moment. In that atmosphere, thoughts may still pass, but they do not rule. They are birds crossing a wide sky. The sky is not in trouble. Rest there. If a phrase helps for a breath or two,
use it tenderly, and then release it back into listening and gratitude. Now, patience. The first minutes may feel barren. Stay. Not to get something, but to be available. Very often the click, the easing, comes after the mind has tired of performing before an audience that won't applaud. Law, not magic, is operating. You have withdrawn fuel, you have honored receptivity, and the river finds its channel in its time. And what counts as success here? Not a blank mind. No. Success is the shift of center, from personal effort to spiritual receptivity. You will know by the fruit. The measuring stops, the breath softens. The burden is no longer mine. And in due course, guidance, provision, right activity appear as added things, without strain, without outline, because contact has been made. Now then, let us speak of the fruit. Because unless you know what to expect, you will call the orchard barren while the sap is only just moving. When contact is made, it is lawful that peace returns, that right ideas appear, that supply and harmony begin to take their places. Added things, not as miracles to a divine sense, but as the natural expression of alignment. You see, God is a law as well as love. When the obstruction of personal management is set down and receptivity dawns, law operates. The proof is not in fireworks. The proof is in evidence. The breath softens. The measuring mind loosens its grip. Then, without strain, the idea you need rises as if it had been waiting at the door the whole time. Watch out. I'm speaking now from the standpoint of the infinite way. The human mind demands instant spectacle and calls it answer. Spirit often moves quietly, and its fruit often travels by ordinary roads. After a true contact, the next day may look unremarkable, but the phone rings with the conversation that opens the path. An email arrives from a name you had almost forgotten. A simple thought comes: put that paper in order, make that apology, rest this afternoon. And as you honor it without drama, you discover that one thread pulls another, and the snarl you could not untie begins to loosen of itself. This is not magic. This is order revealing itself where your argument ceased. How then do you recognize guidance? It is not the frantic voice that threatens penalty if you do not hurry. It is not the argument that needs to win you over. Guidance is cleaner than that. It is quieter, often simpler than your pride would have chosen. Sometimes surprising, but always relieving. It carries no itch to justify itself. If you will be honest, you can tell the difference within seconds. A right idea leaves you more available, more generous, less afraid. A mental concoction leaves you tight and eager to defend. Never, never, never follow a direction that requires you to clench. The wisdom of God does not bully. It illumines. And remember, you do not go within to dictate the form of the answer. You go within for light. Form takes care of itself. The moment you outline, this much money by Thursday, this person must apologize, this door must open, you have descended to the human level and the shade drops again. Seek the kingdom. Let the form be added. I have seen it again and again. There came a season when I could not, with integrity, send a bill or make a plea. I went within for light. The light said, rest. Trust the law that governs your work. From that day to this, I have witnessed provision come through channels I could not have invented. Ideas, invitations, envelopes, the right activity appearing when needed. Not a miracle to God, but perfect law answering receptivity. Finally, be tender with yourself. If today you touched only a minute of true listening, that is not failure. That is the stage opening. Do not measure the orchard by this morning's basket.
Keep to the sequence. Stop fighting. Listen. Rest in objectless gratitude. Return as often as you notice you've strayed. In due season, without strain, peace becomes your atmosphere, guidance your normal, and provision the quiet current beneath your days. Contact brings its own evidence. Your part is to stop outlining and start listening. The rest is law. Now then, let us gather the thread into a rule you can carry into every hour. The problem was never that your mind is too loud. The problem, if we must name it, is that you tried to use will to enter a state that only receptivity reveals. You see, every time you set out to subdue thought, you enthroned the subduer, and the subduer cannot pass through this door. So hear this with kindness and with firmness. Never, never, never condemn yourself for thoughts, and never try to force the mind into submission. Instead, turn within for God contact. Seek God, and stillness will seek you. We must never use the words right and wrong about yesterday's efforts. There are states and stages of consciousness. In one stage, you worried about the noise and tried to hush it. In another, you discovered the listening pivot and let the will fall from your hand. That is progress. That is unfoldment. The correction is simple and absolute. Do not seek a mood, seek the presence. Do not pursue quiet. Turn to, "Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth." And let gratitude without an object warm the heart until receptivity dawns. In that dawning, the quiet you hope to manufacture appears by law, not by labor. How shall you live this tomorrow morning, and at 2 o'clock, and again after supper? Do not wait for perfect conditions, or for a grand session that frightens you with its length. Create a new rhythm of brief returns. Several times a day, 1 minute will do. Close the eyes if you can, or remain as you are, and inwardly acknowledge, "Father, thou art here." Rest for a breath in objectless gratitude, not for something, but because God is. Then listen. Speak, Lord, without bargaining, without peeking to see if silence has arrived. 1 minute practiced 3, 4, 5 times will often change more of your day than one long, strained sitting that keeps you in the project of managing mind. Little doors, often opened, air the whole house. I invite you to verify this, not as a superstition, not as a charm, but as inner law. God is spirit, and God is a law as well as love. Receptivity restores availability, and availability changes experience. Withdraw the fuel of resistance. Assume the listening posture. Rest in gratitude that has no object, and watch how guidance becomes simple. Peace becomes native. Provision appears along ordinary roads. Test it gently. Be faithful to the small minutes. The evidence will not always shout, but it will accumulate, and you will know by the fruit. Above all, take this reassurance as your companion. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are unfolding. There are states and stages of consciousness. Never be ashamed to locate yourself honestly. Never. 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 Each return to listening is not failure, but faithfulness. Keep to the rule. Seek contact, not quiet. Listen. Do not wrestle. Be grateful without bargaining. In due season, without strain, stillness will find you where you are, and it will walk with you as your natural way of being. Seek God, and the quiet you need for this hour will be added.
and the next step will be lit before your feet.